Okay, so this is a supply and demand problem, and they're all very similar. You have a supply equation and a demand equation. Well, think about y equals mx plus b and see how these are following that pattern. It's just that the p is acting like the y. It's by itself on the left. And the q is acting like the x. It's being multiplied by some number that's the slope, and then you have a y-intercept. Okay, so part A says graph these equations on the same axes. Well, you can use Desmos to get an idea of what the graphs should look like, and just remember that the P is acting like the Y, and the Q is acting like the X, and so you need to label your axes accordingly. So the horizontal axis needs to be the Q axis, and the vertical axis needs to be the Y axis. So then you can go ahead and touch on the intersection point or use your mouse if you're on a PC and see that the intersection point is going to be 125, 50. So you may want to use a scale where each box is 5 units so that you can fit it on the graph easier. When I did it that way, it came out really narrow, and so you can even do a different scale on the horizontal axis than on the vertical axis if the graph looks better that way. It does distort the slope though, so just be aware of that, that if the scale is not the same horizontally and vertically, it distorts the slope. Okay, so you can look at this graph to get an idea of how to do yours, but then you need to draw your own graph. Okay, so you know that 100 is your y-intercept of the demand graph, and then it has a negative slope. So this is my Q, and this is my P, and this is my demand. And then I have a supply that has a positive slope, and it starts at 0, 0. So this is my supply. And always they look this way, where the supply has a positive slope and the demand has a negative slope. And we talked about that when we learned about it in the lesson. So that's A, graph these equations on the same axes. Then it says find the equilibrium quantity. On the test, it's going to say use algebra to find the equilibrium quantity. So you need to say, well, what I'm trying to find out is when these two graphs have a point of intersection. So I need to solve this system of equations, and I can do that by setting the supply equal to the demand, because that's what happens at the equilibrium point. So then I'm going to add 2/5 Q to both sides. So I'm going to get 4/5 Q equals 100. And then I'm going to multiply by 5/4, or you can divide by 4/5, same thing. And get that Q equals 125. And we need to look at what we're talking about. Oh, bananas. So it's 125 bananas. Never is Q just going to be a number. It's going to be a number of things. Okay, so that's our equilibrium quantity. Let me label this work here. Then our equilibrium price, I can put that Q in either one of these two equations, and I'm going to get the same number because it's this point of intersection where now we know that the Q is 125 and the P is going to be the same number no matter which of those lines I use. So I'll use the easier one, the first one, where P is 2/5 of Q, which is 125. So P is going to be 50. And then this has units also, cents per pound. Okay, the price is in cents per pound. So that's your equilibrium price. So this is 50. And then it asks us, at a price of 40 cents a pound, is there a surplus or a shortage of supply? So let's look at what happens. If the price is 40, and I'm looking at the supply curve, then I want to solve for this Q, and I'm going to get that the quantity that the suppliers want to supply at that price is 100 bananas. Then I'm going to look at the demand and say when the price is 40, let's see how many people want. And we can subtract 100 from both sides. It get negative 60 equals negative 2/5 Q. Then if you like dividing, that's fine. Divided by a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So I'm going to get 150 bananas. And this first one was the supply. And this one is the demand. So now you're going to think about, well, the people want 150 bananas, but there are only 100. So the demand is bigger than the supply. So we call that a shortage of supply. There are not as many being supplied as are being demanded. And that's it for number 51.